Good morning. I've been told that we have to use the podium this morning because the wireless mic isn't working. So this is weirder for me than it is for you, I can tell you that. But I do want you to feel free to comment, raise your hand. We usually don't speak to the person that's at the podium speaking, but it's okay today. So feel free to comment, wave me down, and let me give you a chance to contribute to our class. As you know, we're studying salt and light in here in our Christian example, and we talked a little bit last week about how it's rather obvious how light is affected. Our Christian light can be dimmed by something blocking it, right? The example given in the Sermon on the Mount is a basket being put over the light. Then the light is useless. But salt is a little more subtle, and we talked about how salt becomes ineffective when it is impure, when it has things in it that yield it unsuitable for its purpose or makes it lose its flavor, whatever the case might be. And the salt that was extracted there in Palestine in the first century often came from the Dead Sea and would be evaporated water, and the remnants there would be salt. And as you can imagine, there might be all sorts of impurities. And we talked about how we all have some sort of impurities in us, in our food. And Neil Gibson has a story, besides his chocolate grasshopper story. So ask him about a goo-goo cluster after class, and he'll tell you about a goo-goo cluster he had once that had a surprise visitor. So impurities, they're not good in our food, they're not good in our lives. And we talked last week about how we are to model Christ. That's the way we have a pure heart and maintain our purity as the salt of the earth. And by modeling him, we examine ourselves and we find things that are inconsistent with his example, inconsistent with his teaching and his life. And we must remove those. We must hate the sin. That's sort of the first step to removing it, is to be able to hate it and then be able to observe it. Then have the courage and persistence to rid ourselves of it. And when we empty our hearts of the evil, we must fill our hearts with the good. And that's where we want to pick back up today. And we mentioned Philippians 4:8. We'll talk about that verse in just a moment. But if we want pure lives, we must have pure hearts. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, and for from it flow the springs of life." This speaks not only to the need of a pure heart, but also the effort and attention needed to keep it that way. And then there's a great example in 1 Peter 3:1-4 of a wife of an unbelieving spouse. And how might she influence him? Well, it speaks to the purity of her heart and her conduct. And that is a great way for us to form an example and a pattern for others to follow to find their way to Christ. 1 Peter 3:1-4, "Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. They may be won without a word." It's often said that people would rather see a sermon than hear one. People need both, but you're more apt to have some influence on some people if you're influencing them maybe without words. You mention it, but you don't maybe berate them, or if they tell you they'd rather not hear it, then comply with their wishes, but continue to give them that example and that pattern to follow. And the characteristics of the godly wife here, the subjection, the humility, her conduct, being respectful and pure, the modesty that she would bring, and having a hidden person of the heart with an imperishable beauty. That's not only true of wives, but of women and men all over who follow God's word and provide an example to those around them. They have those kinds of characteristics. But back to Philippians 4 and verse 8. Paul uses the word "finally" here, which usually people use to wrap up. Now, Paul was a preacher, so this is his second wrap up. He had said "finally" in Philippians 3 and verse 1. And much like preachers, they wrap up, get a second wind, and then wrap up again. It seems like Paul is doing that here with the Philippians. But think about all the great things in the book of Philippians, that book of joy, that book of encouragement, And here's how he's wrapping it up. Finally, here's my parting shot, my parting words for you. And what are they? Well, verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Do you believe that that really works? That thinking on these things will make you a different and better person? How does that happen? How does thinking on things make us do things? How does thinking on good things help us do better things in our lives? Anybody brave enough to provide a comment this morning? Any thoughts? Yes. Okay, great comment that it's often perhaps easier to see it working in reverse. If you consume negative things, if you consume things that are impure, those can quickly change your habits to bad ones, quickly make your salt lose its savor. Perhaps the good things take more growth and development and are a little slower to get us where we want to be sometimes. Great thoughts. I've learned to stop watching the news, right? It helps my mood. It helps me have a better disposition, a better outlook. I'm still aware of current events and get, tidbits here and there, but sitting down and watching a newscast is one of the things I hate to do. If they ever capture me and torture me, they'll make me watch probably MSNBC, but the local news would be bad enough, right? But at least the local news has some positives. But any other thoughts about how thinking on these things makes us better people?
You can start off your day by getting out of bed saying, thank you, Lord, for getting out of bed, or, oh no, another day.
Yeah. It shapes our perspective. The comment was that if you get out of bed and you're thanking God for the day, that's going to put you on a different path than if you get out of bed and say, oh, great, another day. There are blessings in each and every day. Sometimes we've got to work a little harder to find them. And if we're thinking positively, perhaps it's going to be easier to be in the mindset where we're going to see some of those. Bubba? Bubba says oftentimes we sort of aren't intentional in our lives. We're letting things happen to us. We're reacting. We're going about our lives and just thinking, maybe we're not in control. And we shouldn't be in control, but we should put God firmly in that pilot seat, not worry about a co-pilot, right? But living intentionally, that's sort of a cute way of saying set your mind on things. Right? Set your course. Don't just go out and float. Have a North Star. Be in pursuit of your destination. Change things that need to change. Enhance things that need enhancing. Minimize things that need elimination. And work on eliminating those things. That's how some of this works. If you doubt the link between thoughts and actions, think about a virtual reality experience. Have you ever been on one of those where they put you maybe in a little capsule and they move the capsule around in coordination with the video that you're watching, and you feel like you're on a roller coaster, or you feel like you're skydiving, or whatever the case might be. Every now and then, if you're in a mall or something, you'll see one of these, and there'll be a kid screaming to get out because the sensation is scaring them. Well, all that is a series of images and movements, right? It's just things that your brain is thinking. You're not actually on a roller coaster. But your mind, your thoughts are shaping your physical reaction in that case, your stress reaction, your movements, your muscles tensing up. All of that is shaped by your thoughts. Furthermore, if you don't believe in the connection between thoughts and actions, why do we have commercials? Why do we have advertisements? If they get to play the Super Bowl this year, a 30-second ad will surely cost more than $5 million. It was $5.6 million, I think, last year. For 30 seconds of your time, people paid $5.6 million. And that's just for the airtime. They had all the production and paying for the talent and things of the commercial even before that. And in 2011, Chrysler actually bought a 2-minute block of ad time for $12.4 million. Why do companies do this? If there's no link between what you think about and how you behave, why do companies spend time on 30-second ads? Why is Times Square a thing, right? Or why do NASCAR drivers get out of their car and thank Taco Bell, Tums, and Clorox wipes for giving them a good car that day, right? It's because if you hear these things, they're going to go somewhere in your brain, and you're going to make a selection maybe based on it being at the top of mind, or based on some perception that you have because this celebrity is endorsing something, or because you've seen it on a billboard. Perhaps you don't even realize it. That's the scary part, right? I'm not a big believer in subliminal advertising, but I do think that sometimes things seep into our conscience or subconscious and guide our thoughts, and if we're not careful, those may or may not be the right things. Wendell Winkler, who Jacob knows, I think, great man, Jacob's grandfather, of course, said, "We may not be what we think we are, but we are what we think." There's a lot of truth to that, I think. We are what we think. Well, what are you feeding your mind? Are you feeding it things that are honorable, that are true, that are just and pure and lovely and commendable, that are excellent and worthy of praise? Are you thinking about those things? Doesn't mean we never have a thought about trouble or sin or sickness, but the thinking here is more than just a passing thought. It's an intentional, as Bubba said, dwelling on things. It's let me spend some time in this. Let me let God's word, let me let purity, let me let truth shape my thoughts and my actions. What are you feeding to your heart? What are you taking in? James 3:13 through 18 says this: "Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic." And what is it? Murder, fornication, adultery, homosexuality? No, it says jealousy and selfish ambition. That brings it home a little bit more to some of us, but that wisdom is not from above. Verse 16, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." The wisdom from above is what we need to be feeding to ourselves. There's a legend about an old Cherokee who was teaching his young grandson one of life's most important lessons, and he told the young boy this parable. "There's a fight going on inside each of us. It's a terrible fight between two wolves," he said. "One wolf is evil. He is anger, rage, envy, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, resentment, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. And the second wolf is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, empathy, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about this for a moment, and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win the fight? And the old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed. So there's a war inside each of us to do good or to do evil. We have a vessel, our heart, and what are we filling it with? What are we feeding? The good or the bad? Luke 6:45, for no tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree, for no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person, out of the good treasure of his heart, produces good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. Which brings us to our next topic. In addition to having a pure heart, we must have pure speech. Certainly the two are connected, right? We see here in Luke 6:45, having a pure heart is the foundation for having pure speech. But I want us to dwell particularly on speech. Here's a quote from an old document that we should dust off every now and then. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We know this as the freedom of speech, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the first of the Bill of Rights, which secures, among other things, our freedom of speech. But if you go down just a little further on that parchment, you'll find a quote that I actually want us to use for our illustration to kick us off with respect to pure speech. And that is, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We know this as the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Some say it means unregulated access to any and all firearms. Others say it's antiquated and there's no way that the Founding Fathers could have anticipated the kinds of firearms we have today. We're not going to debate this today. Feel free to do so outside of the church building, right? But I want to ask the question today, are guns good or evil? Are guns good or evil? They're neither, right? They're an instrument. Think about this. Let's say someone is coming at you with a scalpel. What do you want to be true of that person? The scalpel is a tool. It's an instrument, right? It's neither good nor bad. But what do you want to be true of the person wielding that scalpel? I would want them to have good intentions, first and foremost. I would want them to be prepared for what they're doing, which I hope would be a surgery and not a murder or assault. I would want them to be sober. I wouldn't want them to be drunk, but more than that, I would want them to be in a good state of mind, unfogged and unclouded and prepared for what they're about to do. I would want them to have skill, and I would want them to have tact and to operate carefully and precisely. Just as the scalpel can be used to take or save a life, it's merely an instrument. It's merely a tool. The same is true of our tongue. Proverbs 18, the first part of verse 21 says this, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." Do we really give our words the gravity that we would give to a loaded weapon? Do we really believe this passage, that in the tongue is the power of life or death? We talked about our heart. What's inside us comes out via our speech. We mentioned that in Luke 6:43 through 45. Here in Matthew 15:17 through 20, which I'm going to read, we see this principle again, and I think we read this passage last week, but it says, do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled, but what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. Our tongue is a tool, like a firearm. It's loaded with the content of our heart, and whatever we filled our heart with will eventually be shared with the world in a way that can either bring life or death. Consider this. On March 31st, 1993, Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee, was filming a scene in The Crow where his character is shot and killed by thugs. In the scene, Lee's character walks into his apartment and discovers some thugs assaulting his fiancée. And in the scene, one of the thugs fires a .44 Magnum into Lee's abdomen as he walks into the room. In the preceding scene, the gun was loaded with dummy rounds, which have a bullet on the end but no explosive inside. And that was to give the appearance of it being realistic. If you were to just put a blank in there, it wouldn't look as realistic. So they loaded the gun with dummy rounds. Well, in between, they took those dummy rounds out and loaded the revolver with dummy cartridges, or rather with blanks. So they had the explosive, so they would give the appearance of a gunshot, the sound and the smell, etc., but would have no projectile and wouldn't cause any harm. Well, they were filming the scene, and at a distance of 12 to 15 feet, the other actor fired the .44 Magnum into the abdomen of Mr. Lee, and there had been a bullet from the dummy round, the one without any explosive, that had lodged in the chamber, or lodged in the barrel, rather. And the explosives from the blank forced that round out with almost the full force that a bullet would be fired, and struck Mr. Lee in the abdomen. He was rushed to the hospital, and after 6 hours of surgery, he was pronounced dead as the surgery was unsuccessful. That was a carefully scripted, scrutinized scene that was being filmed, and care was taken, right, to both make it appear that there was a real round being fired, but then to go and take that out and to put an inactive, if you will, cartridge in to give that same appearance but cause no harm to the actor. Even in spite of all that care and consideration, Brandon Lee passed away that day because of that accident. If you've read James 3, this comes as no surprise that these tools, such as the tongue, can cause great damage, even when not intended. Let's look at that. James 3, verses 2 through 12. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look at ships. Although they are so large, are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be so. Does a spring bring forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both water, salt water, and fresh water. So the tongue is a very powerful instrument, a very powerful tool. Just as a scalpel, just as a gun, or any other potentially dangerous weapon, it could be used for good or it could be used for evil. There are some guiding principles, some aims that we are to have as we use our tongue, as we speak, and those around us hear the contents of our heart. Colossians 4 and verse 6, let your speech always be with grace. Does that mean when your hearer deserves grace, or when the person you're speaking with is extending grace to you, or does that mean all the time? It says always. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. And in Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. So let's think about some ways that we can use our tongue. First of all, some ways we can properly use it, and then lastly, some things we can avoid so that we may maintain, first and foremost, our bringing glory to God, but secondly, our influence on those that are around us. One of the best ways we can use our tongue to influence others is to shut up. You ever said something you wish you could take back? You ever said something that was well-intended but perhaps inappropriate or not well received, and maybe you would have been better served taking a moment and having some silence. I came home early from work Friday, and Carrie had her babies there that she babysits, and she's got a couple of rambunctious little guys, and they had these big Tonka trucks, dump trucks full of Hot Wheels, and they would hold the handles on the dump truck and chase each other around through the kitchen, back through the living room, back into the kitchen. It was rather loud. The Hot Wheels, moving around inside of that while the boys are screaming and running around was a lot to process. I was reminded then why Carrie sometimes wants me to shut up and leave her alone. Silence often is a gift, right? Proverbs bears this out in many different places, and let's look at some cases where it is said that silence is useful. We often don't think of that as a way to use the tongue, but sometimes not firing off, sometimes taking some time and thinking about our words is the best thing we can do. Proverbs 15:28. Along the lines of being thoughtful and deliberate, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. Study how you're to answer. Now, a lot of times the study can be done beforehand. Your heart can be prepared, but sometimes you get a curveball, and someone will ask you a question or say something, and you're not sure how to react. Maybe that's a sign that you shouldn't react. Take some time. Proverbs 29:20. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. And then in a command that's not in Proverbs, James 1, verse 19, be swift to hear and slow to speak. It's said that, of course, is why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? We are to be swift to hear, slow to speak. Restraint is important as well. Proverbs 30 and verse 32. If you have been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you have devised evil, put your hand on your mouth. A bit of a drastic measure, but if that's what it takes to shut yourself up, then do it, no matter how weird it might look. Proverbs 10:19. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. And Proverbs 29:11. A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. Your feelings may be completely valid in your situation, but they may not be the best thing to share at that moment, right? If you're having a disagreement with someone, they might not want to hear how you feel. They might not want to hear anything. Sometimes the best thing to do is to let some time pass and then revisit it when heads are cooler and hearts are calmer. And then lastly, as we mentioned, silence sometimes is certainly a gift. Proverbs 17:27 through 28. He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is calm of spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive. If you want to be considered wise, don't say anything in many cases. I wouldn't suggest that for every business meeting or every encounter, but there are some cases, right? And you'll know them when you see them, when the best thing you can do is not to add to the drama or the situation or to the trouble, because you may not have the answer. So if you don't have anything good or constructive to say, don't say anything at all, as our mamas used to tell us. All right, so another way we can do good with our speech, our pure speech, is to do good things with it. Proverbs is full of thoughts about the good things we can do with our speech. And here are some of those. Proverbs 15:23 says that a man has joy by the answer of his mouth. A word spoken in due season, how great it is. There is a due season, right? Good words spoken at the right time are invaluable. At the right time may be the key part, right? So taking that wisdom that we talked about from James 3 that is from above, and remember it says that those who sow peace are the ones who are doing the good there in James chapter 3. Proverbs 12:25, anxiety in heart causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. Are there those around you who need a good word, need a little cheering up, need someone to call their name and greet them in the mornings? I think there probably are in the course of your day. Proverbs 16:24, pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones. Proverbs 12:18 says, the tongue of the wise promotes health, but there is one who speaks like piercings of a sword. Proverbs 10:21, the lips of the righteous feed many. Proverbs 31:8 and 9 calls on us to open our mouth for the speechless and for the poor and the needy. Proverbs 51, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs anger. Some people don't want a soft answer. They want to engage in an argument. Give them a soft answer anyway. Soft answer turns away wrath. Proverbs 15:26 says the words of the wise, the words of those who are following God are pure and pleasant. Proverbs 15:4, the wholesome tongue is the tree of life. 3 verses later in verse 7, there in Proverbs 15, the lips of the wise disperse knowledge. Proverbs 28:23, rebuke a man and get more favor than flattering. So one of the good ways we can use our tongue is to tell somebody in a loving and godly way something they need to hear that is a rebuke, something they're doing wrong. They need to know, and to not tell them is not using the tongue appropriately. There is a way to do it, and it must be done in many cases. Proverbs 14:25, a true witness delivers souls, while deceitful witness speaks lies. And then lastly, Proverbs 25:15, a gentle tongue breaks a bone. So there are many good things we can do. We can admonish people, we can encourage people, we can give them thanks, we can give them praise, we can give them comfort, we can give them reproof and encouragement. And we must be about that. So what are some things we need to avoid? Well, I think we know many of these, right? But if you had to pick the top sins of the tongue, so to speak, that affect us in the church, the body of believers, those who are pursuing Christ, but because of imperfections, those outlined in James there, about how difficult it is to tame the tongue, those of us who have yet to be able to do that, what are some sins of the tongue that are all too common among us and can impact our salt and our light? Anybody have some thoughts? Yes? Overly critical. Where's the line between critical and overly critical? Okay. When you've passed from constructive to not constructive, it's overly critical. When it's not done in love, when it's not done gently. Yes, we have a God who expects us to do things. He expects us to be holy. He expects us to be pure. But he knows that we are flesh. And he has sent his Son to provide for us. So yes, his word gives us many, many tests that we often fail. And we can apply those tests to other people and point out time and time again how they're failing. But we have to think about the fact that God is gracious to us. God doesn't require sinless perfection, but rather perfect obedience, which won't always yield a sinless life or even a sinless day or perhaps a sinless hour in us. And to not have that godly spirit of recognizing the fleshly nature of people, recognizing the limitations of people, appreciating where they've been, what they've been through, etc., can lead us to being overly critical, because we're critical of ourselves and we want to make sure we're in good standing with God, and we have all of these rules that are meant to protect us and glorify him, and we try hard to abide by those. And so we try hard to make other people abide by those in many cases, and perhaps cross that line to being overly critical and not doing things in love. What's another example of a sin of the tongue, or a way we can use it that's not useful? Well, I've got some if you don't. Okay, Steve.
Here's one, I guess not sinful, but not useful. Saying something that's even just slightly negative or discouraging when you could have said something slightly positive or encouraging. Kind of think, in the course of a day, you probably have at least 100 just little interactions with people. Just a few sentences, checking out at the grocery store or whatever.
Yeah, we have the power to say things that are negative. Sometimes they're needed, sometimes they're not. And the restraint to not say those things is a gift to that person. But beyond that, there may be a way to say something that is perceived as negative or would be critical in a way that makes it more likely to be ingested and realized and accepted. And then beyond that, there are just flat out good things we can say to people. And perhaps to not say those things or to say the right thing in the wrong way is a really poor use of the tongue. Yeah, it's a powerful thing. The sins of omission. We often think about the sins of the tongue, and we think about some of the ones I'm going to detail here in just a moment. But the sin of omission. James 4:17 says, "Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." If you see someone who needs to hear the truth or someone who needs your encouragement, and you don't share those blessings of truth and encouragement, might that be something God would want you to take advantage of the next time you see that person? Doesn't mean you go around and compliment everybody you see all day long and neglect the things that you're supposed to be doing, right? That would be the extreme. But if you're never giving compliments, if you're never giving encouragement, if you're never sharing the truths, whether pleasant or hard with people, you're not influencing them for good. So we've got to use the tongue in a way that is good, and sometimes it means to not use it at all, but sometimes we are called to use it. And if we don't, sometimes that's a sin for us. And so I want us to think about that. Another one we have problems with, not me or you, I'm sure, but probably other people, is gossip. Is gossip ever true? We tend to think of gossip as just a story or a lie maybe that's spread about people. Well, some people will say, and I think I've heard people say this, it's not gossip if it's true. Gossip is oftentimes true, right? The sin in telling something that's not true is called a lie. We can tell things that are true, and it can be sinful because we're doing it in a way that is gossip. The saying is, you always tell the truth, but you don't have to tell every truth, right? So what makes gossip wrong? Well, it might have to do with our intent. Are we saying it just because it's juicy and we want someone's attention and we want to be the source of info for them? Or are we saying these things out of a heart that is considerate of the person that we're talking about and thoughtful and constructive? You know gossip when you see it, right? Some people think, oh, it's just venting or it's just sharing a story. Okay, but examine it and make sure that it's not gossip under the guise of venting or just telling the truth about someone. God is real serious about gossip. If you doubt that, let's look at Romans 1:28 through 32. 28 through 32. You know, we sometimes say, oh, you know, she's just the church gossip or he's just the church gossip and kind of dismiss it. But what if you just said, well, he's the church murderer or she's the church murderer. It's no big deal. Every church has got one. That would be rather ridiculous. But gossip keeps some pretty bad company here in these verses. Romans 1:28 through 32. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. The little church gossip, the little lady that's the church gossip, or the guy that's the church gossip needs your help. Needs you to tell them, if they're telling you those stories, that you'd rather not hear them and you'd rather they not tell them. And maybe they need you to ask them if they've gone to the person and talked to the person that they're speaking of. God's serious about gossip, whisperers, and backbiters, and it keeps some really bad company. Again, going to Proverbs, which is a great book that tells us about how we are to use wisdom in our speech. Proverbs 11 and 13, a talebearer reveals secrets, But he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. Notice the contrast between a gossip and someone who has a faithful spirit. The world knows the difference. The world appreciates one more than the other. When it gets down to brass tacks, they may like the juicy gossip, but if it's something that affects them, they'd rather have a faithful spirit with them than a gossip. Proverbs 26, 20 through 22. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out. And where there is a talebearer, or no talebearer rather, strife ceases. As charcoal is to burning coals and wood to a fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. Chapter 16, verse 27, an ungodly man digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. Chapter 17, verse 9, he who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. Surely we can see that gossiping hurts the cause of Christ. Quickly here in our last few minutes, flattery. Why is flattery so bad? We're told not to flatter, and there's a reason for that. We are to compliment, but flattery is a compliment or some speech that is somewhat impure because the motive is to elevate yourself or to get close to someone who can do something for you. Proverbs 28:23, he who rebukes a man will find more favor afterward than he who flatters with his tongue. So it's not always welcome to rebuke someone, and it is often welcomed to be flattered. But Proverbs 29:5 says, the flatterer spreads a net for the feet of the victim. 26:28, a lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it. Flattering mouth works ruin. And then 7:21, with her enticing speech she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips she seduced him. She was a smooth mouth and sweet words. The flatterer says things that will make someone feel good, but the flatterer's motives are not for the good of the person, it's for the good of him or herself, and it hurts the cause of Christ. We all know that lying is wrong, but what if someone at work says, what did you say about me in that meeting? And maybe what you said was true and asked for and needed to be discussed by you and by management. How is telling them the truth that, I said you were doing X or Y? How is that going to help? How is that going to cause me to influence them for good? In the moment, it may seem like telling the truth is not going to be good for the cause of Christ because it's going to drive that person away from you. Tell the truth anyway, because if you don't tell the truth, you now become impure, and everything else that you're trying to do becomes impure as well. And furthermore, that person will know from that point forward that what you're going to tell them is the truth, if you tell them the hard truth. So when you're sharing the gospel, when you're telling them about Christ, they'll know that you're telling them the truth because you've done that before. And lastly, a sin that we want to avoid in order to maintain our purity, to maintain our influence, to maintain the savor of our salt, is to avoid boasting. This includes humble brags, such as I'm so humbled to have been given the Employee of the Month award again for the 7th straight month, right? People have a way of saying things that seem humble, but really are a way to draw attention to themselves. Don't be that person. I think most of us don't have a problem going around telling everyone, I'm this or I'm that. You know, the kids, when they were little, the girls would say, I'm so pretty. And we'd say, don't say that. You let other people tell you you're pretty, right? Same lesson is for us as adults. You may have some great characteristics that you want people to notice, and you may seem like you're being passed over at work, or that people aren't noticing the effort you're putting in, or your wonderful intellect or sense of humor, or whatever it is you're bringing to the situation. Don't call it out. Let people discover it. And when they realize that there's something beyond and there's something more than what they've seen, maybe that creates a desire with them to get to know you more and to listen to more of what you say, which hopefully are the words of Christ. Again, Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. This week, work on having that pure heart and work on maintaining the one that you've got. Next week, Steve is going to be teaching And the next couple weeks, we'll be wrapping up this class. We thank you for having been in here, and thanks again for being here today. Have a great rest of your day.